You are listening to A Difference for One podcast, episode number 31. I'm Michelle.
I'm Nicole.
I'm Charisse.
And I'm Cami.
We are the English sisters.
We come together to share life-changing methods of improvement through a variety of topics.
We hope that above all, these discussions will help you feel that Jesus Christ is making a difference for you, the one.
And we also hope that our podcast will inspire you to find simple ways that you can make a difference for one.
Hi everyone, it's Cami and Michelle here today, and we want to have a discussion on healthy sexuality. I, being the oldest sister, have been married the longest. I've been married about 17 and a half years, and Cami has been married the shortest. How long has it been now? Just over a year?
Yeah.
Ooh, do you still consider yourself a newlywed?
Yes, forever newlyweds.
Forever newlyweds. And so we kind of hit the front and the back of the sisters, but Cami has a lot more book knowledge in this area. And so we want to have a discussion kind of mixing my long experience with the experiences that she's had and her book knowledge, and just have a discussion on what things we can try, what things we can experience together. For the past couple of episodes, she has been talking about teaching your children about healthy sexuality. And now we want to have discussion on how to have a good sexual relationship within your marriage. Like I said, I've been married for 17 and a half years. And my first question for Cami is, or what I wanted to discuss with her is, if someone were to come to you that had a relationship as long as mine and ask what they could do to spice things up in the relationship and make it more enjoyable, or just changing things and getting it maybe rejuvenating or exciting again, what would you say are places that they could start to try and shake things up and spice up the relationship, and especially the sexual relationship?
Yeah, I have lots of thoughts about this, so sorry if they seem jumbled, but I definitely think that the art of eroticism kind of gets lost, especially within our religion maybe, or maybe within any religion, when it becomes difficult to talk about these things or feel like you are being good no matter what you decide to do within your relationship. But being creative in your relationship is just really so important.
Can you explain what eroticism means really quick to you?
Yeah, so eroticism has a negative connotation, I think, within the world, because often it can be connected maybe with pornography, but really it's such a positive thing. It is basically just being creative and finding new ways to be unpredictable in your marriage and make things exciting and just ignite maybe new pleasures that you haven't discovered before, things like that.
Interesting. I've never heard it talked about that way. I think I've only heard it in the negative connotation, like a billboard of an adult store or something.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when you look up the dictionary definition, it just says sexual desire or excitement. So it's really a simple thing, but it definitely has been construed negatively. We'll be back after this quick break with a message from our sponsors. So I think that is a common question of what are ways to spice up the relationship. And there's actually a year and a half into the relationship that seems to be a turning point in most marriages. That's the point where you decide, where are we going to go from here? Because that's the point where it's maybe a little less exciting. You've gone past the honeymoon phase and it's time to change things up. And of course, you can hit that point a lot in your marriage when things start to get mundane.
I know that one suggestion you made to us a while back, changed a lot for us. I don't even know if you remember, but you were like, just have him brush your hair, in bed or whatever. And that was something really simple and easy that moved us forward into learning new things about ourselves that we didn't know before.
So that's a good point, is there are things called erogenous zones, and it's really good to have a knowledge of erogenous zones. So an erogenous zone is just an area of the human body that has heightened sensitivity and that may generate a sexual response. So there are some non-specific erogenous zones, which are things like the eyelids, eyebrows, neck, ears, temples, shoulders, hands, arms, hair, and stomach. And then there are specific erogenous zones, which are lips, nipples, foreskin of the penis, penis, clitoris, vulva, perineal skin, things like that, they have a connection with the reward system of the brain. So you can use a mixture of both of those things. And most people, when they're in a sexual encounter, they will focus on the very specific erogenous zones. And it's a really great idea to also pay attention to the non-specific erogenous zones, because that's just a different type of intimacy. So hair, that's one of the non-specific ones. And also like rubbing the shoulders, holding hands, massaging the temples, or kissing the neck, things like that.
I had a friend once say that she told her husband, the thing that makes me happy is if you'll come home from work and just kiss me on the neck right here. And that just makes me so happy and loved, and it doesn't even have to be in the actual experience in the bedroom. But I think you've said before that it should be all of those things leading up to it that make it exciting, like make it last throughout the day in little ways that make you look forward to it and make you be thinking about the person and what to look forward to throughout the day. I've really experienced that, where as we take that time throughout the day, then we seem to look forward to it and enjoy the experience more.
Yeah, I think that brings up a really great point. And something that is really good to come back to over and over again is the fact that healthy sexuality consists of three things. It's emotional, physical, and spiritual. And so when you take the time to include all three of those things into your relationship, it creates a much better experience for you. So a lot of times, and this is more common for women, to have experiences that are more emotional than physical. For example, they've done studies where they've asked couples if they're in an argument and then they have sex, they've asked them their levels of satisfaction with that. And for men, it seems from the research that it's not very difficult for them to have physical intimacy when they've just had an argument. But for women, it's more that they need to settle their emotional feelings before they're willing to let go into the physical. And so I think it's just really important to look at all sides of those. And like you mentioned with starting earlier in the day, that is a great tip for couples. So in the class that I took at BYU, my teacher said the phrase, good sex at 9 p.m. begins at 2 p.m. And I think that might be a common phrase, but what's meant by that is doing things throughout the day that help you look forward to the experience. And so if you are seeing your spouse earlier in the day, then it's great to do those things like you mentioned, kissing on the neck or just snuggling or having a great conversation, things like that. But if you're not seeing each other throughout the day, you can call to check in with each other or leave a text or send fun pictures, or you can think about your spouse if you can't interact with them, and you can work together and plan for later on so that it gets you both excited. And with that, I would mention that in a relationship, there's often a higher desire spouse and a lower desire spouse. And so sometimes with the higher desire spouse, they're already thinking about those things quite frequently. And so it can be difficult for them, and they're thinking about it so often, to slow things down once it gets to the actual experience. So to that, I would say that if you know that you are the higher desire spouse in the relationship, you can try to have more neutral thoughts throughout the day. And that will help once you get to the time where you guys are having that physical intimacy. That'll help you to slow your thoughts down and realize, okay, now I'm in this experience. But for the lower desire spouse, then it's a great idea for them to be thinking about it throughout the day and have that to look forward to so that they already are feeling the desire or arousal by the time that it gets there. We also, have to be careful with only talking about it at nighttime, because another great tip for, spicing things up in the relationship is to change the time of day that you are having those experiences as well as the location, which, can be tricky, especially when you have children, but it really makes a world of difference when you're in a new location. We read an article in my class about this couple who they were going to counseling because they were having a really hard time with their sexual relationship. And the therapist suggested that they go on a walk together. That's all she said. Just go on a walk together and come home. And that's it. Every night they would go on a walk together and then they would come home and they would both need to shower. So, at first they were showering separately, but eventually they started showering together because they're like, well, we both need to shower now, so we might as well do it together. And having a new place, it just totally opened a whole new avenue for them where it made it exciting and it was refreshing.
That's cool. So if you are the lower desire spouse and you think about it earlier in the day, but then you just get tired and kind of overwhelmed with the stresses of the day and you kind of fall in bed and are like, oh, I was thinking about this and I was wanting it to happen and now I have no desire. What do you do at that point? Do you just say, we'll try again tomorrow? Or do you try to push through and maybe encourage the other to help you get more in the mood and just push past it? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I have a few thoughts. One is, of course, it's always great to have communication as the basis of your relationship. And I think a lot of times people will muscle through, especially with this particular topic, because they aren't used to talking about it. I thought it was really interesting in my class when my teacher mentioned that talking about sex is more intimate than having sex. And I think that's really true. Like when you are having a conversation where you are so vulnerable with your spouse, that is so much more intimate. And I think part of that might be just because in our society, sex has kind of become commonplace. You know, it's something that everyone does, but everyone doesn't necessarily talk about their experiences, especially if they're having a negative experience. So yeah, I think if you are having a basis of good communication in your relationship, of course, you can always talk to them about how you're feeling and hope that they would understand. And along with that, I think that it's great to create times, meaning schedule in times into your week or your month where you plan to talk about your sexual relationship. And that way you both know that it's coming. You have time to think about things that are maybe worrisome, stressful, or things that are great that you can say, this is what's really working for me and this is what isn't. And with that, I know this isn't exactly what you asked, but when you're in the middle of an interaction, a lot of people don't think that it is okay to stop right then because it will quote unquote ruin the mood. But it's the opposite. That can be a great time to just stop and reevaluate. That's a really vulnerable thing to tell them right then, like, hey, this isn't working for me. Can we try something else? But if you are able to create the environment where it can be more comfortable for you, then that can be made into a much more intimate experience. And so I think it's a balance of like having interactions outside and inside. Another thought that came to me is that you can know beforehand that you guys are switching off weeks. That's just something that you can try if it's not working for you. So sometimes there's a spouse that is more spontaneous and another spouse that likes to have things very planned and wants to know what to expect and when to expect it. And I think that often it's harder for that spouse to feel like it's okay for them to want that because in media and society, it's just so common for sex to be like it has to be heated and super passionate and sudden and all of these huge emotions, but that isn't necessarily the environment that will create the best experience for everyone. So something that you could try if it's difficult for you is the spouse that likes more spontaneity can say, okay, this is my week and I'm the one who's in charge of when and where and how frequently we have sex. And that way, when there's a little bit of give and take and you guys can find a compromise like that, then the other spouse who doesn't like to be quite as spontaneous, they'll know, hey, it's okay. Like I can enjoy this because I know that my time will come and next week I get to be in charge of it. And if you don't want to have sex all week, then that's great. Then it'll be their turn again the next week. But then you get to decide and you have more control over that.
I have a thought about that. Just thinking about, like you were saying, the higher desire partner and the lower desire partner. I think that the higher desire partner loves it when the lower desire partner initiates and takes that step, and where it doesn't have to always be the higher desire partner basically begging for it. I don't know if they always beg in relationships, but it might feel like that to them if they always have to be the one to ask for it. And so I kind of like the thought of assigning, like, okay, this is your week. And maybe on their week, they initiate. They're in charge. Is that kind of what you were saying anyway? They're in charge of making the experience what they want it to be. They initiate it. And I like what you were saying about how it can be where, when, and how they want it. And then the next week, the other person gets to decide. I love that.
Yeah, and with that comes the other thing that I was going to say is just being willing to sacrifice a little bit. So in that scenario that you mentioned where you aren't feeling it, and I mean, especially when women are pregnant or once you get older and your back starts hurting or one of you is experiencing erectile dysfunction, there are so many excuses for why it shouldn't be working right now. Just keep in mind that there are two people in this relationship, and as long as you are both having that communication where you know, okay, there are times when I can sacrifice because I know that they are willing to sacrifice as well. And I know that's not the case for every relationship. It's not always perfect 50-50, but you can decide like, okay, this is a time where even though I'm tired, I am willing to do this for them. And often for women especially, it is more the case with their sexual response cycle that they experience arousal before they have the desire. So in the sexual response cycle, for years, research was mostly focused on men. And so the sexual response cycle was desire and then arousal and then climax and then resolution. And only very recently have they started focusing on women, which I think is fantastic. But they've realized that for women, it's often that arousal comes before desire. And so if you're aware of that, then you can remember, oh, that's right. I know that if I start this experience, it will come naturally and I will enjoy it more.
Yeah, I love that. I think that that's so true. It can be something that as you get started, for me anyway, when the desire's not there earlier, I always am glad I did it afterwards, you know? And so you kind of need to get that ball rolling. Another question I had was, we talked a little bit before about kind of it being a throughout the day thing. Well, what if you want to have a passionate kiss before they leave for the day? But then that's something that frustrates them. Like if you're like, oh, you know, let's just have this passionate moment. And then they're like, but now I have to go to work and I, you know, like it reminds me, we always say this, everybody loves Raymond. He used to say, you've activated the launch sequence and my parents are coming over. And she's like, sorry. I just always will like make that joke like, oh, did I activate the launch sequence? And then he's like, gotta go to work now and I can't do anything about that.
That's so funny. Yeah. I mean, what came to my mind is just being mindful, and meditation is not everyone's thing, but there is research that shows that meditation helps with those types of things. And I think 10 minutes is what the threshold is if you meditate for 10 minutes a day. And that's thinking about being curious about your sexuality, feeling arousal without acting on it, things like that. You get practice. What is my body feeling? What is the experience that's happening? Just like going through your body and saying, what does each part of my body feel like? Are there tingling sensations? Is it burning? What's happening to my mind? Kind of just like a meta experience where you're analyzing yourself. Then once you get into times like that, then you can recognize, oh, this is what's happening to my body, and it allows you to slow down more. And like I said, I know that's not for everyone, but it is something to take into consideration as an option because it really does help. And I mentioned before those neutral thoughts, and I don't know if I exactly know the answer to your question, like how you can just kind of put a stop to that. But I do think that practice would be helpful. Like, how can I have a neutral thought about this?
I think that there has to be that balance of, you want them to know that you love them. You want to be thinking about it yourself throughout the day, but you don't want to frustrate them, you know? And so kind of finding that balance and just figuring out what it is that shows that connection. Because I think as women, especially like you were saying, the emotional connection is so important. And to just have that, oh, he really loves me thought throughout the day, like he just cares so much about me and he's so sweet. Like, I feel like I need that emotional connection. But I think it's great for a man to be like, hey, if you're like, hey, I'm looking forward to tonight, then he can be thinking, oh yeah, I'm definitely going to. And I guess as you were saying, it's the higher desire versus lower desire partner, because it's not necessarily the woman that's the lower desire and the man that's higher desire. We both have a friend that she's the higher desire. And so it depends on the relationship. But that also was making me think about body image and how a lot of people have a hard time getting in the mood or feeling connected to their spouse because of their own feelings about like the way that they look, and they want to look good for their spouse in that way. But then you've had kids and you've had a lot of life changes since you were married that create maybe the body that you don't have that teenage body you wish you had. And so what are your thoughts on what we could do if maybe one or both of you feel really insecure insecure. And I've had friends that have said, I really want to have like that good, intimate relationship with my husband, but I feel so self-conscious about my body and I have a negative body self-image. And yet the other person may not even think about that. They may not even care. And they may even relay that to their spouse. I don't care about that. I love you for you. And it doesn't matter how much the other spouse says, they don't really hear them. You know what I'm saying? And so what would you recommend someone would do that has a hard time with that?
Body image is a huge thing, and I think everyone knows that within our society. So there are lots of things, but a few that come to my mind. We read an article in my class about this very thing, that this woman was really self-conscious about her thighs. And anytime they had any sort of physical interaction, she would talk about her thighs. And he had never once thought anything about her thighs at all. And she continued to talk about her thighs, and how self-conscious she was about them, and they're so ugly. And then he started to feel these negative things about her body that he hadn't had before, which obviously that's the exact opposite of what anyone wants to happen. Keep in mind that it does have effect on not only your mind, but his as well. So be mindful about your words as well. Something that a couple could try is standing in front of the mirror next to each other where you're both naked and looking at each other's bodies. And there are different ways that you could do this. One is, the woman could stand there in front of the mirror and say out loud each of the parts of her body just neutrally to her husband. And then the husband could do that about his own body as well. Or you could do it where you say it about each other's bodies, where you say each part of your bodies. And I think that it just kind of helps neutralize, like, hey, this is just a physical creation of God, no matter what it looks like at this time. And it can be appreciated for just the work that it is, regardless of what it looks like. And I think that is also a great exercise to do while you're alone as well. Standing in front of the mirror and looking at yourself, just taking yourself at face value and talking to yourself about your body.
I love that idea. There is a person that I follow on social media that I really like that says that she and her husband, after they put the kids to bed, will put on some lingerie or something of that sort every night as they're like just getting ready for bed, brushing their teeth, saying their prayers or whatever their nightly routine is. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to lead to anything that night, but it gets them in the habit and routine of feeling comfortable with that and having that connection with each other at the end of the day, where if you're not putting that kind of stuff on very often, it can be very uncomfortable and make you self-conscious. But if you're just doing it every night, you kind of get in the habit of it. You get used to seeing yourself brushing your teeth in the mirror and your husband seeing you like that. And it makes it more of a natural thing to happen a lot, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned the expectations. Expectations can really ruin a relationship. And I think any sort of intimate activity that you're doing should be done without expectations. So something else that is an idea to try is while you guys are laying in bed or wherever you are and you're both naked, you can run your fingers along each other's bodies and you're not stopping in a particular place. You're not focusing on certain parts of the body, even the specific erogenous zones. And you can be mindful about what you're feeling and have that experience for yourself. What does it feel like for me to touch their shoulder or their leg or things like that? And doing that with no expectations of, oh, we're going to have sex after this. And that's the same for if you're having sex, not having an expectation for the climax, for orgasm. And that is a whole other topic of how to balance the need for orgasm, but also not having too high of expectations. But yeah, I think just really taking it for, okay, this is the journey that we're experiencing together, and how can we enjoy the process rather than thinking, let's get to the end result, and letting it be a stepping stone rather than a capstone.
I just can't imagine laying together naked and it not going to that. Do you know what I mean? Like just being like, okay, we tickled each other. Now let's put our clothes on and go to sleep. I can't imagine that being a real thing.
If it does, that's great. But I think the point of it is so that both partners can feel safe. And when there are these expectations of no matter what we do that's physical, it's because my partner is wanting something from me, or it's because there is some sort of end result. And that's not the point of it. We're doing this because this is the intimate interaction, not so that we can have sex afterwards. And so as long as both partners are comfortable with that and that's safe for them, then of course that would be a great thing to happen. But if both partners know like this isn't what we're expecting, then if one of them is having those feelings of not feeling safe.
So talk to me a little bit about what you mean not feeling safe. Like, is it really common for one or both of the partners to not feel safe in their relationship? Or is it more of a comfort level or like wanting to be vulnerable? Because I kind of imagine the feeling of safe being like, is this person going to abuse me? You know, is that what you're talking about? Like people that might be abused in a relationship, they don't feel safe? Or are you talking more on the level of they're just not in a comfort zone?
Yeah, I think it could be a lot of things. I wasn't thinking so much about abuse, although consent is great even after marriage, but more just there are assumptions that's like, well, we've been together all these years. We already know this is what we do. And so once you start creating these assumptions, then you don't know if one of the spouses is thinking, this isn't actually what I would want. I would like to do something else. And so that's why it's important to, also have that communication. But yeah, I think I was talking more about comfortability. And when I say feeling safe, I just mean like this is an environment that I could truly be myself and no one's wanting anything from me. This is who I am. This is what's happening. It just puts you in the present moment rather than, like you said, having an end goal.
Gotcha. Thanks for clarifying that. One thought that I had is, are there times when one spouse might desire something in intimacy that another spouse is okay with doing, but they don't really get anything out of it? Is it appropriate for the spouse that doesn't get anything out of it to be like, my spouse really enjoys this, so I'm going to do this for them. And then they might do something that I really love that they don't care about. Like there's a give and take there, but is it appropriate to do things even if you don't love them just because your spouse does?
Yeah, for sure. I think that just comes with the sacrificing. But also, and I probably should have mentioned this before, but with eroticism and creativity, trying new things, it is super common, in fact, expected for it to be uncomfortable because this isn't what you're used to. And so it's great to give it time. And anytime you're trying something new or something that you are uncomfortable with, or your spouse is uncomfortable with, just allow yourselves to be uncomfortable. You don't want to ever, make fun of your spouse or shame them. It should be a place where there's not going to be any judgment, but you can make it fun and understand together like, okay, this is going to be awkward, but we can give it a few tries and maybe eventually I will like it, or you can try it in new ways, whether it's like new positions or whatever it is that maybe you will come to like it more than you realized. But I think that also just comes with the communication. You can talk about like, hey, this is something I really don't like, because sometimes people have really strong feelings about certain things, and it's okay for you to not expect that of them. Like, hey, you need to do this for me even though you don't like it. I think it is a give and take, and I think the best part is that each couple gets to create their own relationship that's the best for them, and it's going to be so individual and specific just because everyone is so different.
Yeah, and I love that it is a personal, private thing. It's not something that you talk about a lot with other people. I mean, other than like a generalized discussion like this, but you're not talking about the ins and outs of what you would do with your spouse and comparing like all the different details. And so that it really can be that experience that's made just for the two of you, that's special and beautiful and grows and kind of ebbs and flows too. There might be times where it's more enjoyable than others, depending on what else is going on in your life. And I just love how it is so individual based on a couple, and you don't have to perform. It can be something that's comfortable and safe, and you don't have to be a certain way for anyone. It's just about you and your spouse.
Yeah, for sure. And something that I wanted to mention as well, when you were talking more about, some people want more emotional things and some people want more physical, that kind of stuff. I wanted to mention the love concepts, that there are 3 different love concepts, and this might be familiar to some people, but maybe not to others. I might be saying these wrong, but the 3 are eros, philia, and agape. And eros is the passionate and romantic love, the infatuation and attraction. It doesn't necessarily have to be mutual, and it's connected to sexual desire, but not necessarily synonymous with lust. So that's kind of the eros. And the philia is friendship. It's compassion and finding similar interests, like-minded, and the feeling is mutual. And then there's agape, which is a godlike love. It's divine, it's unconditional, unlimited, it's charity and compassion. And so I love the concept of those 3 types of love. And so just trying to incorporate all 3 of those within your relationship, which goes right along with the physical, which is close to the passionate or the eros, the emotional, which is like the friendship or the philia, and the spiritual, which is the unconditional divine love, the agape.
That's really beautiful. I love that. I love how they can be so different, but you can have all of those things in a relationship, and it can start out really strong in one of these areas and then change over time as your relationship grows and deepens. You can find different ways to make it more of an emotional experience or a spiritual experience, or even the eros, the more passionate, romantic love. From my experience anyway, you kind of grow and become comfortable and great friends. If your marriage is going well, I guess I should say, you create a deep friendship and love and connection to them. You find ways to show compassion and charity for them. I feel like those types of things are super easy the longer you're married. At least that's been my experience. But it's really good to find those ways to incorporate the passionate romance, the romantic love, and the desire and things like that that can kind of slip away as you become really comfortable with someone.
Yeah, so speaking of that divine love, that agape, it really is a spiritual experience. And so because of that, I just wanted to end this episode with a spiritual thought. It's interesting that within the scriptures, the word arouse comes up a few times, especially the phrase arouse your faculties. So in Alma chapter 32, verse 27, it says, "Behold, if you will awake and arouse your faculties, even to an experiment upon my words, and exercise a particle of faith, yet even if ye can no more than desire to believe, let this desire work in you, even until ye believe in a manner that ye can give place for a portion of my words." So I loved that within that scripture, it mentioned both the words arouse and desire. Like we talked about before with the sexual response cycle, there's the desire and arousal. And when Michelle and I were discussing this scripture before we started recording, we talked about how the word arouse means to move or to do something. And so in this scripture, they are arousing your faculties means just that, to do something. And within the sexual experience, it's just starting somewhere and taking that next step, doing an evaluation maybe with your spouse where you talk about what are areas that we can improve. How can we improve our desire or find new ways to create arousal, or even just creating a better foundation of communication first. Often that's the first step needed before you can talk about anything sexual.
I like the part of that scripture that talks about the belief and the hope. And in a relationship, if you save yourself until you get married and your first sexual interaction is after marriage, you have that hope that things are going to go well, and that the hope of a beautiful, intimate relationship with each other throughout your life. And it starts with a belief, like, I believe that these things are going to be enjoyable and that it's going to be a positive experience, and that we can grow together as a couple in this way and in very many other areas. And it can start there, but then let that desire work in you, as the scriptures say, and let it be something that grows and grows over time and can become a beautiful, wonderful thing the more you do it. And as long as you are consciously making an effort to put it as a priority in your life and in your relationship, to be intimate, not just in the bedroom, but like you're saying, in lots of different ways, so that both partners can get a lot from it, and it can be something that continues to be desirable and exciting throughout your life. Well, thank you so much for this discussion, Cami. I really enjoy talking about these things. Cami was sending me some texts today about some ideas she had about what to talk about. And I texted her back and said, well, I've learned so much already. I'm ready to try some things. I told her she had mentioned something about setting an alarm for 2 a.m. And I turned to my husband as we were like moving furniture around and said, 2 a.m. alarm. How does that sound to you? And, eyebrows went up and was just like, ooh, something different and fun to look forward to. And so anyway, I have enjoyed this discussion and I hope that we can have more in the future, because I don't know about other listeners, but I know we other sisters have really enjoyed the things that we have learned from what Cami is teaching us in these classes, and we can't wait to hear more. So we will see you all next time. Thanks. Bye.
If you like this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. If it resonates with you, the greatest compliment you could give is to share it with a friend who might benefit from it as well. Check out A Difference for One on Instagram for additional content. And if you have any questions, comments, a topic you'd like to hear about, or if you'd be interested in a free mini coaching session, send an email to adifferenceforone@gmail.com.